Are you nervous?
Not really, because nobody's here.
Teachers in the back. Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Subscribers.
Let me tell you a little bit about what we're watching. Actually, I had this whole introduction prepared where I was gonna tell the teachers in the back what we were watching and what we were studying, but obviously nobody's here. Perhaps someone will pop in, but I have a feeling
No one's gonna come.
a lot. Yeah, because a lot of these lessons happened last semester as well. Like Moises did his last semester, and a lot of teachers came. Not a lot, but there were probably. I popped in. I left my class and told them to study for a few minutes so I could come by, and there were probably 8 or 10 people there, maybe. But I think now everybody's done theirs, and I chose a late date, and I don't know if we'll have any teachers. We might have somebody pop in during class. If they do, that's cool. But
say hi.
I'm starting to seriously doubt it because nobody has said that they were coming, and I think a lot of teachers have this period off because a lot of teachers go to lunch during this time. So anyway, and then I don't think non-English teachers are going to come. I don't think anybody's curious enough to. That's cool. All right, that makes me a lot less nervous. We'll just go about our business as we were going to do anyway. The camera's not bothering me because, yeah, as I told another class, and Arthur, when he reviews this, will laugh at this. If Arthur came in and set up studio lights, like he's done, to film a couple of classes, you would see me truly nervous. You would get to see, and he knows this because he's filmed with me before, you would get to see me really, really, truly forward. Usually for the first 5 to 10 minutes, I am the most awkward you will ever see me. If you turn a camera on me and you say, all right, Alicia, we're going to interview you, I'm just like, no, freeze. Anyway, all right, so we'll watch the end of the documentary. If nobody shows up, I'll let you guys start discussing the questions, but you're ahead of all the other classes because this was supposed to be my demonstration class. But we'll start the discussion. I'll go around and talk to you. So yeah, let's watch the end. As you remember from yesterday, they just left the trial where the old man was speaking and where they spoke to the old man after the trial, right? And they interviewed him and he gave them a little bit of information about his experience, more than what he talked about in the courtroom. A lot more than what he talked about. Now they're going to go back for the last 10 minutes. They're going to go back to talk to the guy in Hungary, Sándor Capiro. The one, remember the grandfatherly old guy who's like, oh, come in, I've made you lunch, here, let me pour you a drink. Oh, this is how we say it in Spanish, salud. Really, I mean, does seem like a genuinely nice grandfatherly old man, which, you know, you can talk about that when you talk about the questions. But yeah, let's watch the end.
But we could judge men who, with hindsight, and at the end of their lives, still couldn't see their role in the horrors of the Nazi era.
It's just a firing squad, isn't it? And there as well.
Sándor Capiro has had 60 years to reflect on the 3 nights he'd been involved in rounding up families who were then massacred on the banks of the Danube.
I can see the photos and it was a freezing cold night in the middle of winter. And the people were taken to the riverbanks and just shot. Well, it's like how well dressed against the cold the officers are, and the soldiers are, and then the people look half naked. And they see the people who've got their legs, haven't they? Minus 30 or something.
We're going back to Hungary to see Capiro one last time. He's always welcomed us warmly into his home. Now we're taking photographs of the massacre to show to him, hoping it might trigger some kind of emotional response.
You know, they had to cannonball a hole in the river because it was so thick with ice. So to make a hole they could push all the bodies into it. I mean, it's definitely the most sickening sort of single incident that we've had to, come across, isn't it?
dealt with, this one is probably the hardest of the three in terms of what actually happened as she's showing these photos and explaining. The river was frozen that day. They had to cannonball a hole into the river so they could push the bodies in. More than 1,000 people died in this one massacre. It wasn't the only one of its kind, of course. But yeah, it's the hardest one they've had to deal with. And remember, just to remind you, the guy they're going to see, Shando Capiro, his role in this, he was not one of the soldiers who was standing over the bodies that you saw. He didn't physically do that. He was one of the people in charge of checking IDs and labeling the undesirable to be sent off. And so he's always maintained, as he did last time, he's always maintained he didn't know what was going to happen to those people. He was just doing what he was told to do. He was just obeying orders.
Good morning.
Easy.
Hello.
Easy.
Yeah.
Miguel.
No, not Miguel, Charlie. Charlie.
Charlie.
To be fair, I mix up names like that too.
How are you?
Disculpe.
Despite the fact that it's only 10 in the morning, Capiro, ever the perfect host, has once again cooked us lunch
So he's
and
prepared a meal
invited his
for
friend
them.
Ava for extra support.
Sie mussten für uns nicht kochen.
Paprika, Schirke, Testo.
I didn't.
But we're determined that we're not going to be put off from getting the answers we've come for.
These are photographs that somebody, a researcher at the BBC has found of Novi Sad. We wanted to show you to see if you have any memories or what you think of them.
Ezeket nem
I
láttam.
haven't seen these.
Ahol én voltam, nem volt ez.
Where I was, I couldn't see such things.
A újvidéki razziának két része volt. Két része. Az egyik a személyazonosság megállapítása, azt végezte a csendőrség, csak azt végezte az igazoltatásokat.
So again, he's explaining his part where he was part of the first part of this, and he didn't know what was going to happen.
A másik rész, a megtorlás rész, azon a csendőrség nem vett részt.
But they were linked, and I know you didn't know what was going to happen, but maybe if you hadn't have taken people's name, maybe they wouldn't have died.
Hát én megmentettem egy családot, ahol ki akarták végezni őket.
This is interesting and important, and the reporter points it out in just a second. Remember, he keeps saying he didn't know what was going to happen to the people, but now he's saying, I saved a family that they wanted to execute. So he's contradicting himself there, where he's maintained the whole time, I didn't know, but now he's sort of saying he did know. And that's a bit, if you think about it, a bit surprising, this contradiction.
Azért mondtam, hogy nálam nem volt fegyverhasználat, mert ahol én voltam, nem volt egy hulla se. Ez borzasztó. Ez borzasztó. De én nem láttam egy hullát se. Ott, ahol én voltam, nem volt fegyverhasználat.
But I didn't see a dead person there.
Ezt én nem láttam.
I didn't see such things. Where I was, these things didn't happen.
It's difficult to work out what Capiro would really have known at the time. But if he saved the family as he claims, then surely he must have known that others were going to be killed. And children, you remember children?
Gyerekekre nem emlékszem. Én felnőttekre, ott ahol én voltam, felnőttek voltak. És aki tudta magát igazolni, az ott hagyták, ahol vannak. A tisztnek csak az volt a feladata, hogy ne legyen törvényellenes az igazoltatás. Ez engem nagyon komolyan belülről érzem, hogy egy borzalom volt, amit csináltak. De azt nem mi csináltuk, főleg a honvédség csinálta.
Even if he didn't know the consequences of his actions then, he's had the rest of his life to reflect on what did happen.
I suppose we just want to know how you look back on the fact that you were part of something that did things like this to people.
Most még egy nagyon fontos dolgot kell elmeséljek, még egy fontosat. Amikor megérkeztünk január 20-án Újvidékre, akkor tiszti gyűlést tartott a legidősebb parancsnok, tiszti gyűlést tartott. És a tiszti gyűlésen elmagyarázták, hogy 3 napig tart a razzia, mindenki a lakásába tartozik maradni. Én voltam az egyetlen, aki azt mondtam az őrnagyúrnak, mert az őrnagyúrt én főhadnagy, legyen szíves ezt írásba adni. Mert ha írásba adja, akkor a parancsot nem lehet megtagadni. Azért, ami történt. Szóval nagyon fontos, azért kértem, hogy engem bíróság elé állítsanak.
I am very sorry, but what can
Hát mit lehet csinálni? Hogy tudom jóvá tenni? Nem tudom jóvá
what
tenni.
can I do?
De amit mások csináltak, ahhoz nekem semmi közöm nincs.
How can I set it right? Shall I stand out in the street and shout, or what? I don't have anything to do with things that other people did.
Piero seems to think that the fact that he never murdered anyone with his own hands completely exonerates him. But his admission that he might have known what was going to happen to the families he rounded up is still shocking for us to hear. For 12 years, millions died at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators, in part because so many blindly fulfilled their orders and managed to convince themselves that they were not responsible.
The men and women we met were the last of a generation, guilty by association, cogs in a grander machine.
We'd been warmly welcomed into their homes and in some way had got to know each of them. It had been a strange and surreal experience.
Whatever the truth of the people we'd met,
their lives seemed to have been forever changed by the events of just a handful of days, each of them now facing a lonely end to their very long lives.
So remember, this came out in 2009, like I told you. Joseph Schwenggraber, the guy that we saw who was on trial, whose house they went to with the lawyers, remember? He was found guilty of his crimes in 2009. So he was the oldest, if I'm not mistaken, the oldest person found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to life in prison. However, Germany decided at the time his health was not good. They didn't actually send him to prison. He was just sentenced to the crimes. And he died, I think, in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And the second guy, Miller Voyasner, or as remember, he was going by the name George Aschner, living in Austria. He's the one who showed his little toy rabbit and was very confused. He never stood trial because of his confusion. He never stood trial. He died 2 years after this was filmed. The last one's interesting. The the guy we just saw, he was actually arrested by Hungary at the age of 95, and he went to trial, making him the oldest person ever to stand trial for war crimes. As it's about to say, if he stood trial, if charged, and he was charged. However, this doesn't tell you because it was filmed in 2009. He was found ultimately, Hungary found him innocent of his crimes. In part because, and I did a little bit of background research about this so I could tell you, in part because Hungary didn't really want to arrest him in the first place. They were pressured to by outside powers. And so finally he was put on trial, but ultimately he was found innocent and he died 2 months after his trial at the age of 97. So first, before we look at these questions, before I have you guys answer the questions, do you guys have any questions about the documentary, about anything that we've seen? I think I've stopped and explained along the way probably enough.
This is episode 2.
Sorry?
This is episode 2.
Yeah, it's episode 2.
And what this episode 3 or
Oh, there are 3 episodes total. The first episode is about the hunt for one single guy who was, at the time, the most wanted. And the guy who goes hunting for him goes to Chile and actually finds his family, but finds out that he died in 1992 in Egypt, where he was living. And the third episode is about the children of people like this and how they feel about their parents' and grandparents' involvement in Nazi Germany. So yeah, if you have Netflix and you're interested, there are 3 episodes. The other 2 episodes are interesting. I gave you the questions yesterday. If you'll get those out, please, I will divide you into groups. Okay, I will. How many people do we have total?
20 yes.
All right. I'm gonna give
No,
you.
20 people.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a number 1 through 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ones over here, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5, 6s. Watch out for the camera.
Okay.
Don't break Arthur's camera. And we'll talk before I have you guys do your group discussion. We will talk about the questions. But find your people.
여기. 주연이 머리카락. 주연아 머리카락. 주연이 탈모야 탈모.
아니야 의자를 쓰면 될 것 같아. 야 우리 돌아봐.
Of course, I brought plenty of copies. Sure. All right. Have a seat with your people. Okay. Before I have you guys discuss these questions in groups, let's talk about them a little bit because I'll give you some background for each one. I just explained, and we just saw at the end, as I just explained, of the men in the documentary, the first man was never sent to trial because of his mental state. We saw the interview with him where he was clearly a bit confused, right? He still thought he was in Croatia. He still thought Austria was part of Greater Germany and that they were still fighting for freedom. Obviously, not really fit to stand trial. The second man, Shando Capiro, he was the very grandfatherly one. Like I said, he was put on trial and found not guilty. He was found innocent, but died shortly after his trial. And the third was found guilty, but deemed unfit to serve time in prison. Germany decided not to put him in prison because of his age. He died in 2015. The first question that I want you guys to answer together, and then we'll talk as a class. Do you think these decisions by the courts were fair or not? Why or why not? Do you think the decisions were fair? And The second question is related as well. This documentary was released 64 years after the end of World War II. There was a lot of debate by that time about whether or not they should keep searching for guys like this because they were really, really old, based on their age. And there was some controversy based on their age about whether or not they should be put on trial. So, in your group's opinion, were they too old to be put on trial for crimes that happened or not? Remember last time I brought up that term, do you guys remember statute of limitations? Did I bring that up last time? Does anybody know what it means? No? Okay, I'll explain. If I go to, I'll give you a very, very simple explanation of this. If I go to the CU Mart right now and I steal a coffee, and so I'm on CCTV stealing coffee and running away, and they see my face, but the police never catch me because I leave Korea the next day. But I come back 10 years later, I can't be charged with that crime because it was a minor crime and the limit of time is over, right? The time limit's over. Yeah, it's called statute of limitations. I heard the second years were telling me that in Korea for murder, it used to be 15 years, but that they dropped that recently. That's what I was told, that it was, that because of some cases that it's been dropped because of what we call in the US cold cases. An example, for example, in the US recently, there was a serial killer in San Diego, in California, who was active in the 1970s. And he was young then, he was in his 20s, but he killed many women in the San Diego area. They never caught him. However, the police had some idea of who may have done it, and they started investigating again recently, and they started watching one guy, and they took some of his trash and tested his DNA, and it turned out to be the guy. So they caught him about 40 years later. And he was one of the police officers working on the case. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's really crazy. He was one of the police officers working on the case. But 40 years later, he was arrested. I think he's in his 60s or early 70s now. He will be put on trial because we don't have a statute of limitations. There's no statute of limitations on war crimes, which again is why we saw these old men in the video being put on trial for their crimes. There's no statute of limitations for murder, war crimes, or genocide. But again, like I said, there was some debate about them being too old. So the question is, what does your group think about that? Yes?
What's the purpose of the statute of limitation?
Well, the purpose of statute of limitations is if you commit something minor, like I said, like stealing a coffee, for example, in 10 years, that's a minor thing, right? There are many, in that 10-year period, there are many, many, many other more serious crimes that have happened. It's sort of, if they don't catch you when you do it, if it's that minor, it's petty, it's just really, and it would also take up a lot of time and money by the courts to have to deal with cases like that 10 years after the fact. So if it's something that minor, that's the purpose of it. With murder, I don't know why it was only, it was 15 years here, right?
Yeah.
That's really short. I'm not really sure why it was that short. Because in the US, yeah, we don't have that, but yeah, I should ask a teacher about that at some point because I'm not sure why it was so short here. But the purpose for minor crimes is just because it would block up the entire justice system to have to deal with, okay, so you caught some guy who robbed a convenience store 20 years ago. It was 20 years ago, it's over, nobody died, it's not that big of a deal. So that's why those laws exist. The third one, as we know, war is messy. During major wars, becoming a soldier is not an option. Boys, I'm sorry, in Korea, becoming a soldier is not an option. You guys have to do it. And we have a saying in English, the winners determine the history of war. Often, the winners dictate the history. And so if you look at war crimes trials from the World War II era, most of the people put on trial were German. They weren't American, they weren't Soviet, even though the Soviets committed, there were war crimes committed by Russia, because at the same time, Stalin didn't like the Jews either. And he had his soldiers kill many Jewish people around the World War II era and before that as well. However, the war crimes trials were mostly against Germans and some of Italians, any of the Nazi collaborators, like we saw one guy was Hungarian, one guy was Croatian. Where's the line in your group's opinion? This is something that's been determined by different international courts and tribunals. Where is the line between being a soldier who is just following your orders and committing a war crime? What's the difference? What do you guys think? I just want to know what you think about this, because that's a really hard question, and it's a question that different countries and different organizations have had different answers to. But yeah, discuss it with your group, and then we'll talk about it as a class. And the last one, as I told you when we began watching this, when we started watching this, I wanted to show you this because it's the way Germany has dealt with World War II history is quite different from the way Japan has, right? You guys know this better than I do. You know this history much better than I do because you start learning it when you're very young. But Japan hasn't really dealt with the colonial era and World War II very well at all. If I remember correctly, I was reading the history of this the other day. There were only 7 or 8 war crimes trials related to Japanese war criminals, and I think that they had to do with things that happened with the US, to be honest. Nothing else has really happened. And when you visit, if you ever visit Germany, you'll see every single town has some memorial or some kind of museum or something dedicated to World War II and dedicated to the Holocaust, because there was a lot of pressure. And there are 2 big differences in Japan and Germany in this respect. Japan is an island. Germany is surrounded by countries that pressured them really strongly to face their history because they were affected by it. Japan's an island, and so there's that. There's also, in the 1970s, students your age, up to people my age, started protesting because their parents and their grandparents weren't really answering their questions when they were asking about, do you remember World War II? Because you know, you do these projects where you go and you ask your grandparents about things. I was assigned things like this when I was in high school. I had to ask my grandmother about World War II. People in the 70s were asking their parents and their grandparents about the Nazi era, and nobody wanted to answer. No one wanted to talk about it. There were massive student protests all over Germany, and that was when Germany really started recognizing they have put it in their curriculum where starting in kindergarten, they start teaching you about what happened in World War II all the way through high school. High school students your age are required to visit a concentration camp. So they're actually required to visit a Nazi camp. One of my German friends who used to work here has told me about that because she's an elementary school teacher and she has to teach the basic elementary school history side of this. So my question for you guys is, at this point, is there anything more that Japan can do or should do? I didn't say should, I said can in the questions, but is there anything that they should do to apologize or atone for actions during the colonial period in Korea and in China, because they were also in China, and during World War II, because as you guys know better than I do, really, a lot of really bad things happened. And they sort of, to this day, it's sort of just ignored mostly. So for example, do you know, do you guys know the island, they call it Battleship Island in English, that's off of the coast of Nagasaki? What is it in Korean? Yeah, right. And I think yeah, that's the one. And I think in Japanese, I think it's Hashima, if I'm not mistaken. That was just recently named a UNESCO Heritage Site. And it was named a UNESCO Heritage Site, and they had to put information for visitors, because you can take a ferry and visit if you want from Nagasaki or one of the other cities in the area, and visit and it's also where one of the James Bond films was filmed. One of the new ones was filmed there. And so there's been some tourist interest in it. But I've heard that if you go and you read the history that they give, they completely ignore the fact that many Korean forced laborers, basically slaves, were taken there to work. And that's just glossed over and not brought up at all. So what, in your opinion, now you've seen how seriously Germany has taken this history to the point that it was carried on into the 2000s with the search for former Nazis in some cases. What, if anything, at this point can Japan do? So yeah, that's what I want you guys to talk about in
If it's
groups.
like from UNESCO,
Yeah.
isn't it powered over by the UN? So it can't be really, like, history can't be really altered by Japanese.
I think what they put, the information, I have to look into this. I know the controversy at the beginning was that the information when you first arrived there just glossed over the part about Koreans being taken there. They may have been, for it to be a UNESCO site, they may have had to add that, I don't know. I just know that that was a controversy for a while whenever they were talking about it becoming a UNESCO site. That's a good question. I will look into that and I'll answer your question later. That's a really good question. Any other questions before you talk in groups? Are you good? Yeah? Okay. You can talk in groups and then we'll talk as class, all right? Yeah, talk to your group. I didn't expect any teachers to come, but we had one. I will say we don't have that much time left. If you don't finish answering these by the end of class, that's okay. You guys are ahead of all of my classes at this point, so. And that's what the guy that you saw from the he said you have to remember this is the guy in his 70s in his prime who did this. That kind of there's been a lot of very much. That's part of it. But his so he's in Hollywood is Jewish and he's in Hollywood that's a Jewish thing. Anyway, Hungary didn't really like him for progressing to prosecute this guy. They said he was being but his defense is that you have to look at him as he was not China. He was in his 20s. He was a fully able adult at that Okay guys, for each group have somebody write your answers to these down.
To be something out of it.
A lot of those people though, if you look up the 30-year trials, the black and white trials, that people were not in, a lot of those people because they gave up so that's not but you're asking the right questions though, because if you work directly with parents and you don't have a choice to, it's pretty hard to and that is a question should we work on trials like this? It's more because like it's no reason. You're asking that's something that I ask. It's war itself. When we talk about this it's war because and you are making an argument that has been made. It is an argument that has been made. It was very. It's been very hard for the international courts to find war itself is something. I do war itself. I do war itself. And the problem is, like I mentioned before, war crimes trials always happen to the victims. So that's genocide is massive. Holocaust is genocide.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's in the question. It says that that for like about 60 or 50 years they didn't find the criminals, and now they're trying to find the guilty people. But we're just asking if this was like a right choice, because the government didn't find these people for a long time, and now they're trying to find them when they're like really old and 90 something.
In some cases, they were searching for these people for a long time.
Yeah.
Like Shando Capiro, the nice grandfather we got.
Yeah.
They searched for him for many years, but he ran away to Argentina.
Oh, so they couldn't find him.
So,
because he was in another
so
country.
the group that was hunting for him, and the group that hunted for many Nazis,
Yeah.
was not affiliated with the government. It's a private organization called the Wiesenthal Center. That's where that American guy who was talking about don't view him as a 90-year-old, view him as a 20-year-old. He's from the Wiesenthal Center, and the Wiesenthal Center is not affiliated with the government. And they've had, I was just telling another group, they've had some clashes with countries over trials of these people. That's why ultimately Shando Capiro was found innocent, because Hungary doesn't really like it. They, from what I understand, by the 2000s they were pretty much done with the Wiesenthal Center, because they said it's been too long at this point. That was their argument. So, and that's what I'm asking, like, has it been too long, or?
Because we were just thinking, like, doesn't the government also have a fault for not just like organizing this crimes against guilty people for like this long period of time?
Part of the problem, and I'll explain. And I mentioned this, but I know it's been a couple of weeks because we had the sports festival. Part of the problem was right after World War II, Europe was chaos, and so a lot of these guys escaped.
They had the time.
They had the time, and the rich ones, and a lot of Nazis got rich because they stole everybody's stuff. Like when they took the Jews away, they took all of their things. So there were a lot of Nazis who were extremely rich and ran away to South America because they had the money to buy a new identity, and it was much easier in the 1940s to buy a new passport.
Because of the security.
Exactly. It's not like today. They didn't have computers. They weren't scanning passports. You could just buy new papers, and because that's how a lot of Jews escaped during the Holocaust. They were able to buy fake papers saying they weren't Jewish, and they were from another country, and that's how many the lucky ones escaped. A lot of Nazis did the same thing, and it was very hard to track them down at the time because of technology. And so, while countries made some effort to, it was really difficult, and it didn't happen a lot until a little bit later when this group, the Wiesenthal Center especially, really started pressing for this, because there were so many families that felt they hadn't had justice, and some very major, one of the worst guys in the entire German machine escaped to South America and was never found until after he died. The angel, they called him the Angel of Death at Auschwitz, where 1.1 million people died. He was the doctor in charge there, and he was nasty, horrible. He was truly evil. Like Hitler, he was truly just wrong.
Like he had a lot of responsibility for this.
Absolutely. He was, if you're going to define anyone as a war criminal, he was certainly a criminal. Because he experimented on people. And
so he wasn't actually a doctor, he was like a person who was experimenting with
he was a doctor before the war and a scientist, but he used Auschwitz as a place to do really, there are videos of this, and I've seen some of them.
Oh my God.
He did really awful things. He escaped, and he made it to, and Germany wanted him because he was high ranking.
Oh, so the government were still looking for him, but they just couldn't.
They couldn't find him. He wasn't in Europe anymore. He was in South America. Eventually, the Wiesenthal Center tracked him down to Bolivia, but he was already dead.
But like, what our question is like, how could the Wiesenthal Center track him down and not the government, when the government has a lot of more responsibility to find these people?
That's a really good question. And that raises the question, do the governments care enough?
Yeah.
You're asking your question. I don't have an answer to it. That's a really good question.
끝나고 사람들이 혼돈의 시기가 있었는데 그때 이제 사람들이 많이 탈출했고 이게 그때는 지금처럼 이렇게 막 보안 철저히 않잖아. 신분증을 영상을 만들면서 그래서 잘 만들고 탈출하고 앞으로 다 만들더라고. 그래서
Guys, all right. I'm gonna say, listen. All right, listen. We only have a couple minutes left. First of all, thank you. You did a nice job. Yay. Even though I know the camera's still on, that's fine. Hi, Arthur. And we can all say hi, Arthur. Hi, Arthur. Hi. Yeah, you guys did a nice job. We only had one teacher attend. That's cool. Makes it easier for me. But yeah, nicely done. You're having the conversations I'm hearing, or the questions you're asking are really good, because you're asking, some of the questions you're asking are the questions that have been raised, especially regarding like war crimes. These things have been raised by countries and debated, and that's why I'm asking you, because I'm curious to hear what you have to say, because people have such different opinions on these things, and you can ask me my opinions next time if you want as well, because I have my own opinions about these things as well. Being American, because you don't see many Americans charged with war crimes, but we've committed a lot of war crimes. We've started a lot of wars that were crimes to begin with. Iraq, Afghanistan. Don't get me started on those. You guys, maybe next year you'll read the book Justice with. Yeah, you guys, is Arthur your teacher?
No.
He's teaching second year, yeah.
Apparently he's going back to first grade next year, so I'm going to go to the principal and talk about it.
진짜로?
뭐라고?
You're going to go to the principal. No, if you, in the past, he's read this really interesting book with some of your seniors called Justice, and about the morality of certain things like what we're discussing. And Iraq is one that's mentioned very heavily in that book, because I always end up teaching a couple of lessons related to the book, relating to Iraq and the U.S. invasion. And yeah, I think I mentioned yesterday American Sniper, that movie. Yeah. Yeah. I love Bradley Cooper. He used to just be a comedy guy in the beginning. Hangover, yeah. He was not such a serious actor. He's actually a really good actor. I'm impressed. I didn't take him very seriously because he was very silly in his first big roles, like The Hangover. Anyway, Bradley Cooper. He is American Sniper.
You saw Stage Boy?
Ask me in English.
you watch Stars Born?
No.
With Lady Gaga in it?
No.
Let's not. Let's not.
Not really my thing. Is it good? Okay, maybe I'll have to watch it. Okay. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Maybe I should switch this off and take it with me. And
Let's not.